to the...
Well, usually psychiatrists are off.
I'm sorry?
They are off.
I mean, the question is there anything of psychiatric value, you know, in here?
Well, if one like at a very simple level is the question of sexual orientation and gender role, and what do we do in a case with a patient, when a patient is a trans patient who's in love and a heterosexual person who has issue accepting him or her.
Okay.
And would that matter? At that point, with the question of the genital, the biological sex would matter at later in life of the life of these trans. Because in this case, she identifies as a woman, and she's halfway through, but still she's having a problem being accepted by somebody who loves her the minute that he knew that she has a penis.
Well, one of the things that I think that your comment points out is that our nosology is kind of limited, because we don't really have, I think, a lot of, and certainly in our training, most of us don't get a good sense of the diversity of sexual presentations and gender presentations. So people tend, because they don't get it in their training, to use their own personal opinions to fill in the gaps. That's been my experience. How many people think here you've had good training in human sexuality? And,
yeah, that's
yeah, right? Well, the public thinks you have. By the way, so when you see a patient,
you're the expert.
Almost every patient believes that you are an expert, and the truth of the matter is that most people are substituting their personal opinions, for actual expertise, and this is a problem. Because your comment, Sammy, made me think about, I was seeing a patient not in therapy, I was the medicated psychiatrist, he had a therapist, but, he revealed to me, 2 years into treatment, although he was married with a child, that he was really attracted to partial, transition with trans women, and that he was involved with ongoing relationships with women who had breasts and penises, she-male, all the names you can use, but so that was his. So what do you call that sexual orientation? That that's neither heterosexual nor homosexual. It's
Bisexual.
Right. Well, what do you call a sexual orientation of a man who's sexually titillated by watching films of two women making love to each other? Is that a heterosexual orientation? Why two women?
He's greedy.
No, he's a frat. I thought he's a frat boy. No.
So actually, that's common among heterosexual.
Right. So when I say, although I have the greatest respect for the work of Kinsey and the development of the continuum scale from heterosexuality to homosexuality, bisexuality, in between, it's a limiting way of thinking about things, because as we become a more sexually open culture in terms of people being more aware of what people are actually doing, we're seeing that the categories are quite limited.
So, do you think that?
Yes.
Should there be culturally sanctioned names for many different types of sexual proclivity orientation, or is it more sort of an individual process of naming where the idea of an overarching nosology starts to break down even as a conceptual model?
Well, John Money's work is very interesting to read, because he was a sex researcher who just loved to name everything. And he had a name for everything, and he was versed in Greek and Latin, and there's all these very complicated names for every possible kind of sexual or gender proclivity that he saw, because he saw a lot. He set up the gender clinic at Hopkins. I think we find, certainly psychiatry more than any other specialty is the place where there's always a tension between lumping and splitting. That is, that we make sense of certain kinds of experiences by creating categories that help us make sense of experiences in general. But the problem, with doing that is that sometimes we can lose sight of the individual. So in a sense, if I meet you for the first time, oh, I got a call today, call today from a mom looking for a therapist for her child. I had a whole conversation in gender-neutral language, because the child who was 16, previously identified as a lesbian, has now been talking about transitioning to become a man. The lesbian mother thinks this is due to the influence of a trans person who is pressuring undue influence, and they took her to see another therapist who within 30 minutes was calling her child he. And this made mom really, really angry.
He's avant-garde.
So the question is, how does a therapist in 30 minutes know what the person's gender identity actually is? One could say, yes, if I meet a person, I would want to call them by the gender identity that they prefer to be called by, but that isn't the same thing as saying I know what that gender identity is. Anybody else? Yes?
No, it's a showstopper.
Right.
I remember, one of the reasons why I came tonight was because I had just told my seatmate over here is that I saw this film in the theater in 1992. And I saw it with my best girlfriend, Teresa. And we had one of our only 2 fights of our entire decades, many decades of friendship after coming out of that film. And I was interested to see if whatever it was, this thing we thought about in this place where we had to stop in order to be friends, still friends, would be mentioned here. And I can't quite find it. I've got a feeling it's here, and I'm sort of putting it out there. As I walked out, I was struck by the capacity of human beings to take steps across boundaries, to move toward another. And no matter our rules, we've got these rules. And maybe this is the continuum without labels, right? She saw this as horrifying and was taken aback and said that cannot happen. What I was accepting, I'm not saying this well, what I accepted completely in this film, even with all the barriers, that these 2 human beings had reached out to one another and had achieved something, and had connected, and that it was love, she could not accept. And that was a certain kind of boundary for us. So,
Because it wasn't heterosexual? What was it?
well, I think that was it. Where she could have friends who are gay. She can have friends who are gay. That's real clear, isn't it? But can we accept love that takes you into places that you didn't think you would ever go?
Well,
I know I'm not being
well,
very
first of all,
articulate.
I don't believe that everybody can accept everybody's kind of love. I think that our field has done a tremendous disservice to many people by presenting judgments about what constitutes, the right kind of loving versus the wrong kind of loving. There are even people today who continue to use words like perversions because they present themselves as experts on the right kinds of relationships. Even though they don't mean perversions in the Freudian sense, they still decide they've used the word because somehow psychoanalysts are experts on love. If we look at our divorce rate, I don't think so, but nevertheless, but they act as if they do. 52% of Californians voted to repeal gay marriage. So it's not an unusual you know,